Sarah, you have been reading along with me this new transcript, Stormy Daniels telling her side of her sexual relationship with Donald Trump. Tell us which part of her story has the potential to impact the presidency the most.
It's interesting. It depends on whether you're talking about impacting the president himself on a personal basis or impacting the office of the president. So let's start off with some of the things that we have now read in the transcript. Many of these things, I must tell you, we have already known. Here is the first one. It talks about her relationship, her first and only, as we learned in this interview, sexual relationship with Donald Trump. Anderson Cooper asked her, and you had sex with him? She says yes. Then Anderson Cooper says, look, you were 27, he was 60. Were you physically attracted to him? Stephanie Clifford said no. Anderson Cooper says not at all. She says no again. And then he asked, did you want to have sex with him? And she says no, but I didn't say no. I'm not a victim. She has been very, very clear on that point, that she does not want to be seen as a victim here, that this was consensual sex, and that she did this of her own accord. She went up to his hotel room. She kind of found herself in a position. She thought they were just going to go to dinner, and then he invited her into the hotel room where they were supposed to have dinner, and things turned into something much different, Anna.
Sarah, Stormy Daniels says she was physically threatened face to face by a man in a parking lot, and she says she was terrified. This is not the threat of a lawsuit. She says she felt like she would be physically hurt. Now, this is different from the other women who say they had relationships with Trump.
Yes, she did talk about this, and this is new. So the other details we had already read in her In Touch magazine article that she did, that published just recently, but that she did back in 2011. What is new here is that she is claiming that she was threatened, and one of the threats, and the only threat that she mentions, a physical threat, is when she was in a parking lot in Las Vegas. Stephanie Clifford saying that she was in a parking lot going to a fitness class with her infant daughter. She had just had her baby at the time. She said that she was kind of trying to get the seat fixed in the back for the baby seat. And then she said someone walked up to her, a guy, and said, leave Trump alone. Forget the story. And then she says he leaned in and looked at her daughter and said to her, that's a beautiful little girl. It'd be a shame if something happened to her mom. And then she says he was gone. That is the first time we have heard about this threat of physical violence. She very much thought it was a direct threat. She said she never went to the police with that, but that she was afraid. Anna?
All right, Sarah Seidner, stay with us. Much more to discuss, but I also want to bring in the rest of our panel with us. CNN senior media correspondent Brian Stelter, co-chair for Women Vote Trump, Amy Kremer, and CNN legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Laura Coates also with us. Former assistant U.S. attorney Kim Whaley and CNN legal analyst Mark Garagos. So I know everybody's been quickly reading through this transcript. Brian, I first want to just get your take, your immediate reaction to what you are reading.
That her lawyer, that Stormy Daniels and her lawyer are saying this is about the cover-up. This is about the payment right before Election Day, how that payment was arranged, what it meant for her to be silenced in this way, and she feels she has to defend herself. So that's her message to Anderson Cooper in this interview. It's one thing to read it, it's another thing to see it. And as we see the clips tonight, as we see this woman testifying to this for the first time on camera, I do think that'll make a big difference. In the same way that the Karen McDougal interview a few days ago made a big difference. When you actually see someone speak about these alleged affairs, not just read a headline, but see the passion, see the emotion on the person's face, I think that makes a big difference. The one other quote I would just pull out at the end of this interview, she says to Cooper, if the president's watching, I want him to know he knows I'm telling the truth.
And of course, credibility is key, right, Laura?
It's so key here. Remember, it's two different boxes to think about, regardless of whether she's credible about whether she had the affair or not. And that is still kind of an allegation out there. It may be a foregone conclusion to many people. But for a court to be looking at this, they're looking to figure out whether she has the right to talk about it still. That's the underlying issue for all of this. Whether it actually happened is also a part of the issue. But really, the biggest chunk of this and the interview you want to watch for is what Michael Cohen's involvement with. Because the whole thing about this comes down to campaign finance violations. if he was to make that $130,000 contribution to Stormy Daniels, a.k.a. Stephanie Clifford, with the hope of trying to make an in-kind contribution to the President of the United States, now presidential United States campaign, and that's a violation of the law. And that's what I'm looking to see. That's what I want to hear more about, because as it stands, I'm hearing a lot of the probably salacious details, but what about the law from the court's perspective?
And just one bit of reporting about Michael Cohen we can share. The New York Times sharing tonight that Cohen had dinner with President Trump last night at Mar-a-Lago. I've texted, called Cohen, tried to confirm. He's not answering his phone right now. Maybe he's waiting to watch this interview like everybody else.
Well, of course, the president has been silent on all of this all along. Amy, this is a president who doesn't hold back. Right. Especially when it comes to Twitter. He has not even tweeted about these allegations. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't expect him to, and I would actually be shocked if he were to do that tonight, because this is ongoing litigation, and he has legal counsel that's representing him. I think he has spoken. He has spoken when they filed the lawsuit recently, the $20 million lawsuit against Stormy Daniels. So I think that was him speaking out, but I mean, that's all I would expect to hear. And he's denied this. I mean, he has denied this. So I understand the FEC part of it and what you're discussing, but at the end of the day, that may be something that people are concerned about. But whether or not he was unfaithful or had this relationship, it was consensual between two adults if it did happen. And I think that other than that, there's really no relevance. I mean, it's not something that his base is concerned about. That's not why. I mean, people elected him knowing this. This is not a surprise.
Well, people didn't know these stories specifically, but to your point, you said this is ongoing litigation. That's why he's not tweeting. I mean, he hasn't held back of going after Robert Mueller in an ongoing investigation that is looking into potential criminal activity. So
that's an investigation.
That's another example in which it contradicts what you're saying.
That's an investigation that they're looking for collusion with the Russians. There is not a legal lawsuit right now at the time with that, and he's also got counsel for that. But this is something against him personally, and I don't expect him. I mean, all of us know here that if we were in litigation with anyone, you're not going to go out in the media and talk about it without consent from your counsel, and your counsel's not going to consent to that.
Well, so some Reservos blows that out of the water, though, because in a way on the campaign trail, remember, there was at least a couple women that were accusing him of this sort of thing. Well, actually, non-consensual some Reservos, and her statements were that this in fact happened. He called her a liar. So perhaps the prudent course that he's taking is one that he doesn't take with the Mueller investigation, and that is to be silent, because now a New York State court has said, by the way, that comment, that statement that was not just off the cuff, it was on the campaign trail, has caused you to now have a vulnerability to be deposed for the first time in a state court of a sitting president. So perhaps he's learned from his own past, his prologue, but I think it's far more odd that he would talk about Mueller than he would talk about
Let me get Mark Aragos in here. Mark, if President Trump were your client, what would you be advising him tonight?
Well, look, the people tend to forget he had no trouble when he was dealing with Trump University with not only commenting on the case, but taking the judge on in that case with a full frontal assault. So he's done it with Mueller. He's done it with Trump University. The reason, and he's done it with other women, the reason he has not commented and is peculiarly silent when it comes to both McDonald and to this woman is because it's obvious that it's true. Yeah, yes. I mean, it's obvious that it's true. So the problem he's got is, I don't understand it, and we haven't seen it yet, at least in the transcript that's been released. She must have something. There must be something else, because otherwise this strategy is totally out of character. I don't understand it. I don't understand why they've well, I do understand why they removed it to federal court. They're a lot more likely to get it compelled to arbitration, and that's going to be the end of this case, because you're not going to hear any more about it unless Michael comes out and talks about it. But it appears to me, at least, that that's where this case is headed. It's headed back to private arbitration.
Do you really think it's going to end up in court and the litigation is going to move forward, even if it means that the president, Michael Cohen, will have to be deposed?
Yes, because they're going to go, one of the reasons they removed it to federal court, it was in state court. They asked that, and you have the right to have it removed to federal court. They believe, I think, that if they are in federal court, that a federal judge, in this case Judge Otero, is going to compel them to arbitration. If it goes to arbitration, then that is private. They're going to argue that's what we bargained for, that's why we paid $130,000. You want to do this, that, or the other thing, that's fine. But once you're in arbitration, the arbitrator's got the ability to award damages, which is, I think, their calculation as to what's going to happen here.
Kim, Brian brought up another woman, Karen McDougal, and we heard from her earlier this week. I'm reading through the transcripts, and there are a lot of similarities in how they're describing some of the things the president said to them. Of course, this was before he was president in 2006, both of them talking about some of what happened around the same time at this golf tournament in Lake Tahoe. Can McDougal and Daniels end up testifying in each other's cases?
Well, in any civil litigation, if it's relevant and consistent with the rules, sure, they can be subpoenaed to testify in each other's cases, as can the President of the United States. In addition to the ruling that we just saw, we have Clinton versus Jones, in which the Supreme Court of the United States, under a Democratic president, held that no one is above the law, and in this context, in a civil litigation, he can be deposed. It's not going to interfere with his presidential duties. Although I sort of see things a little differently in that these lawsuits, I don't think, are really going to end up meaning a whole lot legally, because even an arbitrator has to apply state law, and state law requires reasonable damages, and the extent to which this is tarnishing the president's reputation, I think, is really dubious. But the bigger issue has to do with what the American public knew when they were voting for this president. And we don't have background checks, security clearances for elected officials, because the election process serves as that. And if we don't know what is being hidden, we don't know what can be used against an elected official, then we don't have the information we need to cast a vote. So I do think this has bigger implications than just the sordid, sad details that are coming out every day about this relationship or these relationships.